Pollution, as in the ironic observation, if you can't see it, don't breathe it. Increased reliance on coal is a crucial part of the Carter administration energy program. But the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee heard warnings today that a coal-burning society may be making things hot for itself. Nelson Benton reports.
The so-called greenhouse effect is created by carbon dioxide, a colorless, odorless gas. In small concentrations, it helps to sustain almost all life on Earth. The relatively small amounts of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere filter the warming rays of the sun to the Earth's surface. But like a greenhouse, carbon dioxide also prevents heat given off by the Earth from escaping into space. Researchers say increasingly large amounts of CO2 are accumulating in the atmosphere. They fear the Earth will gradually become warmer, causing as yet uncertain but possibly disruptive changes in the Earth's climate 50 to 70 years from now. Fossil fuels, when burned, release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Coal, the worst culprit, oil and natural gas to lesser degrees. Scientists and a few politicians are beginning to worry that global energy planning does not take the greenhouse effect seriously enough. If the Earth gets too warm, for example, ice caps could melt, raising the level of the seas.
Possible, probable, we really don't know. But if it happens, it means goodbye Miami, goodbye Corpus Christi, goodbye Sacramento, goodbye Boston, which obviously is much more of a concern, goodbye New Orleans, goodbye Charleston, Savannah, and Norfolk. On the positive side, it means that we could enjoy boating at the foot of the Capitol and fishing on the South Lawn.
Concern about air quality usually centers on pollution.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Environmental Coffee House. I am Sandy Schoelles, and I see you're all here. We have a really good show tonight. I am hosting Jennifer Hynes and Nicholas Humphrey and Antonio Reid, and they're going to come on with us in a second. I'm just going to give you a shout out, and as usual, I will be manning the behind the scenes. So if you have questions for the end, put two Q's in front of them, and then I will be able to handle that. Okay, so I'm going to say hasta la vista, baby, and you guys have a wonderful show. All right, all right. And I will bring in the rest of everyone. Good evening, guys. I am there. Okay, a little late. Better later than never. There you go. Jennifer.
Hey, guys. Good to see everybody tonight. We're so excited to be with you. We've got Nick, Antonio, and myself. And as usual, on the State of the Planet, we're going to talk about all things climate change with even social and political implications. And, I myself am going to be talking about ocean heat and Arctic temperatures and Arctic methane. And I don't know, Nick and Antonio, do you want to give an overview of what you're up to tonight?
Sure. I was going to talk about. I got a few things. I was going to talk about the some of the update on the extreme heat event, the heat wave that occurred last June in the Pacific Northwest. Some records were set that were confirmed, and then I could also talk about some of the impacts by a cyclone that struck Madagascar 2 weeks ago now, And then I could also discuss some issues going on in Kentucky related to tornado recovery.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I was going to talk about what policy planners across the world are doing in response to the realities that we'll be revealing today. One of the things that we'll talk about is the carbon intensity as a direct result of carbon policy or drawdown or carbon emissions reduction. But also, I was going to do on a separate piece an update on what's happening in Winston-Salem with the Weaver fertilizer plant and a discussion on some of the social, political implications of the environmental disaster that we experienced almost 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, Antonio, that was absolutely amazing. I could not believe that that went off so close to home. Just crazy. Has that fire finally gotten out now? That fertilizer fire?
So, yeah, I'll do the update now. The fire itself is extinguished. The firefighters are still going in and removing some of the material. According to the Winston-Salem Police Department, it's likely that the fire started actually because of some of the machinery that's used to move the material got loose. And because the machinery got loose, a part actually warmed so hot that it became molten and actually fell
Mm.
on the ammonium nitride, and that is what started the fire. By the loading decks is what is likely is the cause here. But of course, actually sifting through the rubble and finding out the exact cause won't be something the firefighters will be able to do for some time. So we won't have an exact answer on what caused the crisis. Now, there is
Mhm.
a lot of implications in terms of actually emergency and disaster preparedness. One of the issues that came out, of course, Winston-Salem isn't the only city in the United States that has heavy chemical or heavy industrial plants near residential zones. This is actually a common problem that we have in the United States. And what we're finding out is that it's increasingly difficult to actually make emergency plans regarding some of these facilities because we're not allowed, the public isn't allowed to have data on how much material is on site and actually the composition of those materials on site. And because the public doesn't really have access to this data, it's really hard to tell, well, uh, what type of proximity is too close, what type of proximity is enough to get away in case there is a crisis that happens. A lot of this data is not just readily available, and there are certain rights that corporations have apparently that make it more difficult to get our hands as a public on this data. Right now, in Winston-Salem, this is actually one of the major issues regarding the Weaver fertilizer plant. There were 100 homes within 500 feet of the plant. You know,
Oh my God.
this was a
That's
situation,
incredible.
and just to know that there was more ammonium nitrate on site than that was in the Texas fertilizer fire that killed 15 responders and injured over 200 more. So this is actually serious. And I think for our audience, to keep this in mind, the climate crisis is like a catalyst to already exacerbated crisis happening. So part of the problem here in Winston-Salem was that actually the Weaver fertilizer plant was supposed to submit a new licensure form to the Department of Health and Safety here in North Carolina about these materials that were on site. And some of these inspections, when they're not properly done, or when they're postponed, or when we don't have the manpower, or when we face political defunding, a lot of this stuff gets put to the back burner. And what we've seen is time and time again, uh, these situations exacerbate crises we're already facing. And here in Winston-Salem, this wasn't linked to any particular climate crisis. But of course, if this is already happening in non-climate extremes, imagine the type of perils we'll face when our infrastructure is being tested by climate extremes.
It's so weird that the public isn't allowed to know about it, Antonio. Don't you find that strange?
Well, a little bit like Nick was saying before the show here is that a lot of people, and in fact this has happened, have actually blamed the residents. It's your fault for living in a community with a facility like that nearby. And one of the things that I tried to align people was that, well, first of all, a lot of the people who live here tend to be low income and people of color. These are people who don't have the resources necessarily to live elsewhere in the city. And then second, again, the information about how much material and the composition of material on site is not accessible to the public. So it's not as if people could be properly informed and make decisions based off of that. You're
Too
really asking
weird.
you're really
Yeah.
asking a bit for the public when it actually ought to be political leaders. It should be city planners and municipal leaders who are making that decision. And I'll be quiet really quick, but I'll say this: it is true that the Weaver fertilizer plant was built before the encroachment of suburban Winston-Salem. But the problem is that the zoning was allowed to develop. There wasn't any call to remove the plant or place it somewhere else. But nonetheless, the crisis did occur, and we just so happened to be lucky, and that's literally what the responses was of the fire department, that this thing didn't explode, because if it did, it was going to be the worst explosion in American history.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so close to home. So scary, right?
I'm 1.3 miles from the site itself. That's my
God.
apartment. And the so-called evacuation zone was a mile radius. So it's my apartment is 0.3 miles from the zone, which the chief of the fire department said everything was going to be leveled within that 1 mile radius. So we are very fortunate here that did not happen, because I would have been well within the range of the shock wave.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. So
Yeah,
close.
Can I add something? Listening to this description of the situation and some of the um, regulatory problems. It reminds me of my first course actually at NDSU and emergency management. I had to take a course in the history of emergency management in the United States going back to the 19th century. And one of the case studies I had to read about was about the Texas City explosion of 1947. It was a ammonium nitrate blast. Ammonium nitrate on a ship caught fire. Firefighters went there, tried to put out the fire, but they didn't quite understand what was on the ship. There was much of the port facility was privately owned, and the corporation that ran the facility wasn't required to have regular communication with the city government on their activities, on exactly what was on the ships at any given time. And within, I think, 20 minutes, the ship blew up, killed almost the entire fire department for Texas City, and sent a shockwave out that destroyed another industrial site that killed a bunch of people, and then killed and injured people in the city itself. And like with situation in your community, Antonio, many of the people living closest, in some cases very close to the port, were lower income Black and Hispanic people, some of them workers, port workers, or workers at the nearby industrial facility. And their houses were not, equipped to deal with, a hurricane, let alone an industrial blast. And many of their homes were leveled, and people were killed in the blast. And other issues like a lack of evacuation. You had people converging on the port to look at the fire that had like an orange color, so it interested them, but not realizing it was ammonium nitrate that was on fire that could explode.
Oh my God.
So it's amazing to me that 1947 and 2022, many of the issues with corporate lack of corporate responsibility, which really comes from government oversight, is still lacking. And although we may have more laws than we did in 1947, there's they have lawyers, and they have ways to get around things and ways to avoid or delay, and that's what the cost of it. That's the cost of those loopholes are these crises where you could have potentially had a major Texas City type detonation. That detonation was enough to shatter windows in Galveston, 20, 30 miles away. So, you would have had something very bad if it had gone off so close to your home, Antonio. Yeah.
And that's why it draws concern for me because, as we are moving into an era where we're going to have to increasingly deal with crisis, I just wonder about city officials and city managers' ability to actually protect the public. I had a lot of questions about what was deemed a safe zone. I had a lot of questions about how information was getting out to people right outside the safe zone. I was actually in an argument, unfortunately, online with a firefighter whose name I won't disclose. But I had remarked that I thought the city should have done more to inform the civilians who are immediately right outside of the so-called blast radius. Do people not understand how physics work? The blast is not going to observe the blast radius. It's not as if the blast radius ends across the street, so too will all the implications, the replications from the blast. No, like you say, the shock wave in that particular instance had gone all the way to Galveston, but the shock wave in the 2013 and 2014 Texas incident, that is what injured over 200 people in the surrounding area and damaged hundreds of buildings. And so for me, just to be 0.3 miles away from where everything would be leveled, I'm just thinking, God, I'm glad I didn't stay here because if the bomb did go off, even though I was outside of the evacuation zone, I don't know if I would have made it. But that, again, for me, calls into question, how do we, in fact, make these type of judgment calls? It was very odd to me. One of the things that I remarked, and this may have something to do, I don't want to be accusatory, but it seemed odd to me that Wake Forest University, parts of the school were evacuated, and they were further out than my apartment complex. We had North Point Medical, which is even a mile further out than where I am, was evacuated. So some places it seemed were evacuated and some places were not. And I just wonder, how did that call come down? Why were some businesses and people informed to be evacuated, even though they were further away, and why were others not? And I really didn't get an answer, at least not from the individual who was engaging me. And I'm still looking for one through the information coming from the city.
Well,
That is just shocking.
I could probably tell you that it's probably, each organization will make its own policies, and the government, through the first responders, they made the call about the 1 mile radius. However they decided to make that call, I don't know. It may be relatively arbitrary, to be quite frank. Because you would actually have to know, how much material is in there, and then how the explosive capability of it, and the ability of the shock wave to actually do significant wind damage to the point that people could seriously be injured or killed from falling trees, collapsing buildings, etc. But obviously, the humans that were running the hospital, that were running the university, and think of the potential responsibility they would have over the lives of the people in those facilities or that campus. They obviously took extra precaution because they could imagine the blast being bigger than 1 mile. So they had their own judgment calls, and there was no coordination between the government and there's a lot of times there's very little coordination between the government and organizations, private organizations, on how to actually conduct that. It's the judgment call of the individual organizations on what they want to do with their people outside of the government's mandatory evacuation zone.
It's just a microcosm of what's really happening on the planet in general. But you guys, well, you, Antonio, just happened to experience it, We all have our weird brushes with unexpected disasters. And that's why a disaster, it's unexpected, like we had a fire here, and it was closer to my house than I thought. I was only 5 miles away from that, and it burned like 1,000 houses in just a couple of hours. And that was because of the extreme dryness. And this was on New Year's Eve here in Boulder, Colorado. And it just swept through, and the winds were just crashing at 100 miles an hour coming downslope from the Rocky Mountains, with extreme drought. And that and a little bit of fire can get you a disaster really, really quick. But that's the thing. It's so fast when these things happen. You just never expect it to happen, and then you don't expect it to be as fast as it is. It's shocking, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Nick? What were you going to talk about tonight?
Yeah. So I was just going to touch on a couple things, maybe a couple smaller things, and then a more important issue on my mind that I think is relevant to, or will be increasingly relevant to the climate crisis. I just wanted to first update people on the heat event that occurred in the Pacific Northwest last June. That killed over 500 people and across Washington, Oregon, British Columbia, and lasted multiple days. There's been a confirmation of the all-time record highs for Washington and Oregon being set during that heat wave. Hanford, Washington, was confirmed to have reached 120 degrees, which is an all-time record high for the state of Washington. It broke the previous record of 118, which occurred in the late 20s and then the early 60s. So 120 degrees, first time there's ever been any sort of 120 degree temperature in Washington State. And then in Oregon, it was also confirmed. I don't remember where, but there was a temperature, a tie for the highest temperature recorded in the state of Oregon of 118 degrees, or 119 degrees, excuse me. I think it was 119 degrees. So just absolutely extraordinary temperatures. I mean, this was the heat in like Portland got into the mid 110s, and then Seattle, I believe, reached the upper 100s. And I mean, it was just very extraordinary heat that occurred. And obviously we know about the heat that hit, I believe it's Lytton, if I'm pronouncing correctly, Lytton, British Columbia, that where they got to 121 degrees, and the day later they had the fire that burned the entire community to the ground, devastated that town. So it's been found through climate attribution that heat event would have been virtually impossible without human-induced climate change, enhancing that event and causing the extreme heat values that occurred. So it is unfortunately, an example of what's happening across the planet, where you're just getting the system being gamed up with far more likely to have heat records than cold records, and that disparity between heat records and cold records will continue to grow in the coming years and decades. This is going to dominate as you continue to have global warming. So heat and also drought. Actually, Sandy, if you want to put up real quick that drought map that I provided to you, You can see the drought occurring across much of the United States, western and central part of the United States right now, just widespread drought conditions across a wide swath. Some of this is induced by La Nina, where you have unusually cold waters in the tropical Pacific, and it changes the jet stream pattern. So you have less moisture going into this, particularly the southern part of the U.S., but even the northern part of the U.S. I mean, here in North Dakota, there's been some kind of drought all year, much of the year. In the interior West, very dry. Down into Texas, very dry. So that's been much of the story for much of the year. And heat and drought are really the biggest, and heavy rain events are really the most obvious indicators that you see for climate change. Increasing heavy rain events, increasing droughts and swings between drought and heavy rain. And I mean, that's what you saw actually in Madagascar. 2 weeks ago, there was a landfall of a Category 3 equivalent cyclone in Madagascar, Cyclone Batsirai, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It impacted and so far has caused the death of over 100 people, destroyed over 100,000 homes, and it's displaced over 100,000 people. It's been an absolutely devastating cyclone, and is hit a place that has been dealing with significant drought conditions over the past couple of years, including drought-induced famine for a country that is like a lot of countries in the so-called developing world that are maybe more dependent on or have less options as far as resources. And when one resource goes, the economy tanks and people start to have more difficulty with their livelihoods. And then they're very vulnerable to hazard events like drought, and then obviously cyclones, where they go from drought to flooding in a very short period of time. And, that's really the struggle that the world will face with more, hazard events that become certain hazard events that become more likely because of climate change. I mean, the thing about hazard events is that, and disasters, is that there's always been disasters regardless of climate chaos. If one emergency management PhD that's on Twitter, her name's Samantha Montano. She's actually a graduate of my university, my program. She wrote on Twitter a few days ago a very good point that disasters would occur regardless of climate change. And tomorrow we still have disasters, because she sees a pattern where people are, particularly policymakers, are using climate change as an excuse to get out of actually dealing with the structural vulnerability problems that a lot of people face in communities, in societies, because that lead to disasters. Disasters are not natural in any way. They are the I guess you could say, the exploitation by a hazard agent of the existing vulnerabilities in a society. And if you have people that are poor and can't afford to, certain things to help them reduce their risk from hazards, or they are forced to live in areas that are close to the ocean or close to industrial sites. We talk a lot about environmental injustice, environmental racism. Then those people are predisposed to having greater risk from disasters and having more difficulty to respond to them and more difficulty to recover from them. And recovery from disasters is absolutely understudied by much of the literature, dispersed literature, when it comes to disaster and hazards management. I read a story just yesterday on and if Sandy, if you have that link to that story from our chat, you want to share it with people in the chat, you can go ahead and share that story, that news story that talked about the Kentucky tornado, and they talked about people getting ready for it when it was coming and responding to it, trying to survive the tornado. But near the end of the long article, it discusses the recovery process. And recovery is one of those things where it's more than just about trying to rebuild buildings. It's about uh, at least it should be. It should be about trying to um, rebuild, and reshape the society to allow it to be more resilient to the impacts of hazards of the future. But what typically happens is that you have governments that don't really take recovery seriously. In the United States, they punt it on nonprofits to do a lot of the rebuilding and reshaping work, which, I mean, many nonprofits, both secular, faith based, they try to do their best. They have missions that commit them to doing the work, but they need funding sometimes from the government, and there's a lot of bureaucratic red tape. There's just simply no sense of a unified coordination to make things streamlined to help people ultimately get back on their feet and do better next time, including dealing with some of the I would say structural vulnerabilities that impede people not only to prepare, respond to disasters, but then recover from them. And I mean, the article talked about not only the issues with trying to get rebuilding done, but also just dealing with mental health challenges. People are, there were, I think someone from a nonprofit in that story was talking about, we're getting a lot of people that have mental health issues, like survivors that feel guilty about surviving, or people that just lost, lost friends, lost family, and have difficulty with that, or lost everything and are dealing with stress or post traumatic stress disorder, and that will affect the community for years to come. Not to mention, some people may move away, so you have depopulation problem, where you lose your tax base and the community weakens because people go elsewhere, which has happened with Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. I mean, it depopulated New Orleans. People didn't come back because they simply couldn't afford to. They were sent somewhere else and never left where they were sent to. So the original community was essentially lost. Its culture is lost, and its social structure was lost because people aren't there anymore to move back. So recovery is, and I'm actually taking a recovery theory class right now in my PhD program. And one of the things my professor has emphasized is that recovery is multifaceted, from individuals to businesses to nonprofits to the community and jurisdiction itself. It's complex, and it's not guaranteed, and it has no end. Recovery has no defined ending. When you're recovered, it's a process, and the process could be done much better. But unfortunately, it's like, it's piss in the wind. People don't know what to do with themselves, and there's very little done to help people recover. And when you think about the context of climate change, you're going to get bigger events or more frequent events, and recovery gets all that much harder if you get hit by a Category 5 hurricane one year, and then you get hit with the drought 2 years later, and then another maybe weaker hurricane another year later, but then you didn't recover from the Category 5 or the drought the 2 or 3 years before. It drags down the ability of the society to be able to function.
Can I ask you, isn't then, and this actually is coming from, I guess, my studies in international relations, but isn't resettlement part of the recovery process? I mean, because after all, particularly when you talk about places like New Orleans, I think in reality, what's happening in New Orleans is more of a when, not an if. I mean, it is under sea level as it is, and the sea level is rising. So how much of resettlement is being considered in the recovery and emergency management process?
Well, I mean, resettlement, is something that you have to consider when obviously the environment that the people are living in may not be supportive of them living there any longer. Which is obviously with climate change, heat can destroy crops enough you can't farm in a location anymore, or the sea level rises and you get saltwater intrusion and you don't have fresh water in the area. So it's it's something that you can do, but the problem is, number one, governments don't really think that far ahead. But even if they did, they would have to there would have to be consideration for the respect for the community and the culture. So if you have, because I mean, the United States is kind of very individualistic society. People just kind of move on their own. But if you look at, say, Bangladesh, or or India, or other cultures that have more of a collective attitude, I remember, for some of the research I was doing on warnings related, to my potential dissertation research, I read a paper, um, um, by some researchers that looked at typhoon response or cyclone response by a village in Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, at least the smaller villages, they when they evacuate, they will evacuate as a community, because the community is tight knit, know each other, and is very collective in nature, not individualistic. So they will actually meet in the town square and have the leadership or the elders hear from the people, and then they make a call on whether to leave or not. So you could have some societies, some communities that are more collective, and they will be told that it's in their best interest to leave and resettle. But first, they have to make the call that they want to do that. They can't be forced. And if they're going to do that, they need to be sent to a place where ideally their quality of life could get better. That would be the best, but at least stay the same, not degrade compared to where they were, where and their culture and their values can be respected elsewhere. And instead of having a diaspora scenario where they get thrown in every which way and their culture gets lost. Part of this process of recovery and resilience should be not just about people living, and it should be about cultures being able to survive, and that want to be together, continue on somewhere else. So that's really what we want to have is cultural competence and respect for the people to make their own determination of where they want to go, and their values.
Yeah, absolutely. And the theme everywhere is heat. We've been talking a lot about ocean heat lately, but ocean heat is way, way up. And Sandy, I did send you a graph with ocean heat. It's blue and red, and it says the world ocean in 2021 was the hottest ever recorded by humans. And you really get the feel, if you look at the declination of the line that is formed by this ocean heat, you can see
I'll
it's
get
just
it up.
going up, and yeah, going up and up and up. It's the last one of the last ones I
Yeah, I
sent you.
know. I don't know why it's not in the software. Just continue
Oh,
on and I will get it there.
okay. Okay. But, it's causing a lot of side effects. And, of course, it's going to cause glacier melt in all over the place, wherever the glaciers are near the ocean. That hot ocean water is going to intrude into that glacial cavity, and that's going to cause sea level rise. The Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica is what they call a retrograde slope, which means it goes down, like it goes down into the land. And that's just a cavity, filling up with hot ocean water. And when the Thwaites Glacier goes, all of it's about the size of Great Britain or Florida, that's going to cause about 25 inches of sea level rise, approximately. Who's to say for sure? But that is just shocking. But that all has to do with hot oceans. Now, another thing, of course, the hot oceans do is they kill the sea life, they kill the coral. The fish can't get away. They keep trying to go north, but they can't get out of this heat, and the fish just end up dying. Recently, the Mediterranean Sea, which has coral,
Was this the
actually.
Arctic news, Jen? The world ocean in 2021 was the hottest ever?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'll bring them up and show them. Okay. It was this.
Yeah, right. Mhm.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah,
Sorry, I had this up. I
yeah.
was looking for something else.
Oh, no, it's okay. But look at that. Look at that, guys. You can see that pretty much ever since, looks like 1980, it really started to take off, right? It was sort of kind of stable through the 60s and 70s. This is the ocean heat. And then in 1980, it started going up and up and up. And look at that. It's absolutely incredible. And this hot ocean is going to melt ice. It is melting ice. It is going to bleach coral, all over the world. We've talked at length about the coral reefs in Australia, the Great Barrier Reef, but corals all over the world are getting bleached, and it's just it's a very disheartening affair, and it begs the question: is there anything that we can really do about it? We always talk about like saving the whales, save the oceans, all these things. But we've been talking about this for decades, and people have had petitions, and it's just getting worse and worse. And now it's downright scary, you know. And these warp speed heat waves impact and alter climate systems, and it's causing feedbacks. And all this heat, people are now talking about methane. Yeah, I actually saw it on PBS. I'm sure a lot of you guys here have seen. A lot of you guys have seen the methane show that was on PBS, where they were talking about the quote sinkholes in the Arctic. Well, they're not sinkholes, as we all know. They are methane blowholes. But I found it interesting because we all here have been talking about this at the top of our lungs for at least the past 8 years or so. And finally, it's reached the place where PBS can play a documentary about it. And it's pretty darn shocking. Um, so there's that. And another thing I wanted to talk about was the Mekong River Delta, because that place supports an incredible amount of agriculture and rice and people. It's very densely populated. And the Mekong, which is a mighty, mighty river, is getting all dammed up. All its tributaries are all dammed up. There are main dams on the Mekong itself. And when you get down into the Mekong Delta now, down in Cambodia and Vietnam, that has got salt inundations, because the salt water the Mekong is not as powerful as it used to be. The silt is being held back, which used to clean the Mekong. And that rice paddy land is getting inundated with salt, and it's really shocking, to see that. So that's kind of where we are with the yeah.
I was just going to say,
Antonio.
to add to that, I share your concerns, particularly in the Mekong, because, as you say, from the south they're facing saltwater intrusion, and from the north they're facing the the damnation of the river supply by, of course, not only the Chinese, but as the river flows through Indochina in general. And the population estimated supported by the Mekong Valley and its food production is between 10 to 20 million. So there's a substantial number of people, and that's just in the direct area. So of course that would have impacts on the global food supply chain network as well. And so we're starting to see that these impacts are increasingly compounding.
Yeah, they are. I don't know if you know Nick and Antonio, but I used to live on the banks of the Mekong when I was a girl growing up. When I was between the ages of like 9 and 14, I lived in Vientiane, Laos. Um, and my experience of the Mekong, it was at least a mile wide. It's the border at that part of Laos. It's the border between Laos and Thailand. And during the rainy season, it's just this vast sea that you just couldn't believe, a river could be so big. That's how the Mekong was back in the day. And then I went back to Laos about 12 years ago or so, and the Mekong was really depleted. And I couldn't believe the changes in it. So it's, mankind and humankind has such an effect. Um, it's absolutely unbelievable what we can do and how we can change things for the worse. So,
Well, I think that's a good segue into my last part about carbon intensity. Sandy, if you'll bring up the graph and talking about the things that we do, the scale that we do them. Of course, the reason why Earth is undergoing the changes that we're all talking about here
Hang on a
is,
second.
is because humanity has been engaged in a project of industrialization since at least 1750. This industrialization has put immense amounts of energy into the planetary system. And this energy is a result of, well, the everyday things that we do. And the things that we do, particularly in the developed world, require a lot of energy. And there are ways that we measure the amount of energy required to carry on our daily lives. The first term I want to bring to your attention before the graph comes up is not carbon intensity, but energy intensity. Energy intensity is simply a term that's used to describe how much energy does it take for you to do a particular thing, right? So how intense is your commute to work, for example? If you drive, for example, a big SUV that requires, those 13 miles to the gallon, but you're driving 20 miles, your energy intensity is going to be higher than if you're driving a car for, say, that got 30 miles to the gallon doing that same trip, right? Or if you have to do certain things on your commute, right? Those additional things that you do on your commute would also increase your energy intensity. So one of the things that climate scientists have done is, because most of our energy usage is connected to our carbon usage, we get a very clean carbon intensity of electricity, both for North America. So we're looking at Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And as you can see here, the areas in Canada, by the way, that are white is because there's just not a lot of energy production in those areas. It may not be because people don't live in those areas, although those areas, as I'm telling you, are quite sparse. The energy production is kind of narrow in Canada. But as you can see, the places with the highest carbon intensity as a result of producing electricity overwhelmingly are coal generating states. So in the United States, you see the heartland of the country, the old Rust Belt, Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, Indiana, Michigan. Those, you can see they're really heavy red, they're dark orange, and black, and that's because of the reliance on coal. And as you can see also in the Canadian archipelago, it's not that a lot of people live in that area of Canada. It's just that the primary energy source there is coal. And so the energy intensity, even though it's lower energy use, is higher. Sandy?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, is the carbon intensity in Canada because of the Alberta tar sands and the manufacturing of all the fossil fuels? And I will leave. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it depends because countries are really interested. So countries may not say that the production of tar sands itself contribute to carbon intensity. What they might see here, it says electricity. So the actual production of tar sands may not actually be factored in, just the actual consumption of those materials, which of course are actually not being consumed in Canada. That's why we have the pipelines coming through the United States. So likely not in that case. But this is also another problem that policymakers have gotten into, is that our lives are increasingly energy intense and they're increasingly carbon intense. But here's the problem, is that we can actually reduce carbon intensity and increase carbon usage at the same time. And this is actually, I'm forgetting the paradox of efficiency here that occurs, the exact name for it. But what happens is that, for example, so if you have a more fuel efficient vehicle, you don't actually save on gas. You actually plan more routes. You go like, oh, well, I saved 10 miles because my car is more efficient. Well, now I'm going to use those 10 miles to do something else. And so while the actual carbon intensity of every individual activity you do might go down, overall your energy intensity goes up. And because it's using that carbon energy, your overall carbon emissions go up as well. And actually, that's a problem that we've seen across the world, is that as countries try to make their systems more efficient, it actually creates greater room to continue to use those systems. And so, what carbon intensity is actually, what studying it is telling us, is that we can't just make our systems more efficient. More efficient is going to induce demand. And so what we actually need to do is move away from these systems altogether. And
Yeah, you
unfortunately,
talk about. I was gonna say you talk about Jevons paradox, just the name of it. I had to look it up too.
oh, okay, thank you,
Yeah.
Nick, for that. But the issue that we're having increasingly is that the oil industry is moving toward this language of lowering our carbon intensity instead of our carbon emissions in totality. And it's important that we actually keep the argument centered on lowering emissions in their totality and not just the carbon intensity of individual activities.
That's really interesting. Hey, Sandy, I sent a little picture along in our group chat there. Coal consumption by region, as long as we're talking about carbon intensity. It's kind of interesting who's using the most coal and how. Do you happen to see that one? It was
I
a picture, just
have.
a picture itself.
Yeah. Hang on a
And
second.
it's got
For some,
blue and red and
yeah, there was a weird reason that some of the pictures did not up. Okay, I've got it, and it is the coal consumption by region, and I
yeah,
will bring
yeah,
that up for you.
that's the
Forgive
one.
me for not having them up in the software.
Oh, we sent so many to you. It's surprising
Yeah,
you
but
can
I
find any of them.
no, it's just really weird that I didn't. I thought I had uploaded them. Okay, go for it.
So this is pretty interesting, this coal consumption by region, and you can see it's going from 1965 to the present date. And overall, coal consumption has gone up really dramatically. In fact, it started really ramping around the year 2000. It was fairly stable through the 1990s. And then when the 2000s came, even though we knew full well about climate change and what happens when you pump loads of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we just, money, 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 So the Asia Pacific region is by far using the most coal. The US is actually not using that much coal. It's kind of interesting how the US is not one of the biggest coal users. Um, it's kind of been fairly stable. Actually, its percentage of coal that it's using is going down. That's the lighter blue right above the Asia Pacific region. But really, as far as burning coal, the Asia Pacific region is the one that's burning the most coal by far. And coal consumption, at least it's not going straight up now. It seems to have, like, if you look at it from a worldwide level, it seems to kind of be, I don't know if I'd say tapering off because it's still at a really, really high level, but at least it's not going straight up. So I do hope that coal gets phased out soon, because that's one of the filthiest, that is probably the filthiest energy source that we use. So
Yeah,
that's just what I wanted to talk. Yeah.
and that's exactly right. And the Chinese and the Indians, as far as I'm aware, have collectively over 150 new coal-fired power plants that'll come online by 2030. And so I don't think that the level of consumption of coal is going to go down. In fact, if you look at the International Energy Agency's World Outlooks, coal is supposed to be a strong part of the global energy mix into 2050. So I think that's why that reliance is still there, because coal is very cheap, and Indochina, which now their economies are starting to explode. I mean, look at the economy of Vietnam compared to what it was just 10 years ago. Um, so you're starting to see these countries, they're going to dig into their coal reserves and burn that energy. And they have prodigious amounts of it. So I am greatly concerned. And here in the United States, we are moving away from coal because it's just now more economically viable to have gas operations. But what do we find out from our gas operations? Well, and that's another thing when we have these talks about carbon emissions, is that I think we have to keep it square on carbon equivalency and not just carbon, because what we're finding out is that these gas wells, which we were told by the industry leak at 1% rate, actually in general leak closer to 4%, um, have just as much implications in terms of global warming. And that's we need to differentiate our language here, right? So coal power plants are not the worst type of energy generation for global warming. They're the worst polluters, right? Because they push a lot of particulate matter into the atmosphere. They're also global warming causers, but we also know that they actually have a dimming effect as well. Well,
Mhm.
natural gas, which is mainly methane, doesn't have it's much quote unquote cleaner than coal, so it's not as dirty as a pollutant, but it's a much stronger warming energy source than coal is. And we know that because the primary greenhouse gas released by burning coal is carbon dioxide, and the primary one from developing methane and burning it is, excuse me, natural gas is methane.
That's right. And when the natural gas methane is burned, of course, it emits carbon dioxide. So you still get the carbon dioxide regardless.
Well, you get
Plus,
it fold, right? Because when you're developing the natural gas, turning it into LNG, you get a lot of the leaks and you get the methane. When you're pumping it and welling it and drilling it, you get a lot of leaks, you get a lot of methane. And then when
a
you actually
lot
take
of
the product and you consume the product, you get carbon dioxide. So you get
you can't
tons
win.
of methane, and at the end you get a bunch of carbon dioxide.
Yeah, yeah, and if anybody's not completely depressed yet, I saw a graph recently about all the different energy sources that civilization uses, and it's basically the big ones are coal, gas, and oil, and those make up like 80% or something like that or more of everything that we use. And, we think we're doing so great with renewables, but, wind, solar, and then anything else, it's just really a very small percentage and it's intermittent. So we are in a predicament. We are in a pickle. I don't see a way out of this mess, guys.
Well, and then look at, and now my final words here is look at what's happening in the United States. I just remember in 2018 when we got the IPCC special report on 1.5, there was this kind of collective sense of we have 12 years, we have 10 years before this all goes down the drain, and we got to make this work. And then like the big, this is what we're going to do, the so-called Build Back Better plan is not even off the ground. In fact, it's dead in the water. So like the big last hurrah that we were supposed to do over this last 10-year stretch is dead in the water. And
Yeah, you know what it gets? It's dead in the water. There you go. Bye, Build Back Better.
I could add something. I think one of the um, biggest inhibitors to, and it's been throughout, this time since we've known about human caused climate change is human behavior. I mean, this is a big thing with emergency management is dealing with the human experience and also like human behavior and how that affects how people do things and their experience and things. One of the biggest problems with dealing with, trying to prepare and mitigate against events is it requires humans to think ahead of time. So individuals and communities and their governments that and hopefully democratic societies, they choose who runs those governments, and it's equitable to some degree and not corrupt. you ideally you have to have everyone on the page of we need to think far ahead, but the problem is humans tend to be reactive, and so that was a big problem, earlier in the history of the United States. If we talk about the U.S. context, we've gotten a little bit better at not being so reactive and a little bit more proactive, but the proactivity is very limited still in terms of planning for the future and trying to deal with how to do things better. And in the bigger the scale, going from national to global, the harder it is to both get people to coordinate on things and then at the same agree upon a process and actually implement that process, knowing that it's something that you have to think in terms of 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, and not just tomorrow. And so that's the biggest challenge. I mean, you see this in other avenues all the time. Like one problem is such as dealing with humanitarian crises, humanitarian emergencies. There's um, um, very little coordination between various international bodies and how to deal with humanitarian issues and humanitarian crises. Governments are mostly non-binding international obligations. I mean, much of the climate policy is non-binding. There's no enforcement because we have no international government. And there would never be an international government that tells entire nations, you have to do this by this time, you have to do that by that time. I guess theoretically they could all agree on actually having an enforcement policy, but how are you going to enforce it? The only thing you could do is like sanctions of warfare, and that does nothing to actually deal with the problem. You actually have to be able to just agree and get along, and that's very hard to do with various nations with various interests among their ruling classes, differing cultures. I mean, one thing I kind of sometimes rubs me the wrong way is and I don't want to get flamed for this, is that there's some people here in the U.S. where we're relatively privileged to choose what kind of like diets we want in terms of like being vegetarian or vegan or whatever. But there's entire cultures in other parts of the world where that's either not possible or practical, or that's part of their culture for decades or for hundreds to thousands of years to eat a certain dietary lifestyle. And obviously, it's different for the U.S. because here in the U.S. we're very energy intensive and eat wasteful foods, that are poor in nutrition, and the nutritional value of what they eat, even if they eat meat or whatever, maybe a lot better, ironically, than it is in the privileged U.S. But you have to deal with trying to respect cultures and and all around the world and get them all to agree on something and have them uniformly do it, and that's really impossible. And so humans are naturally in their enclaves and collectives and different cultures, and it's very hard to get that kind of agreement. So that kind of thing for something like climate change, which is so big and all encompassing in various different ways of society, and the effects of that are very hard to resolve with the human process that doesn't really think about policy 30, 40, 50, 60 years into the future. And I mean, this world's going to be a very different place, very, very different place in 50,
Yeah.
60 years, 20, 30 years. It's going to be a very different place. It already is
Yeah.
compared to 2000 or 1990.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. It's happening faster and faster, and we haven't seen a leveling off of too much. I mean, we've seen a little bit of leveling off with coal, but as Antonio said, they're committing to burning more and more coal in Asia as much as the rest of the world starts cutting it down. They're burning a lot more coal in Asia. So, yeah, this world's going to be a completely different, place in 20 or 30 years. It's just happening faster and faster. One thing is the oceans are going to be hotter. How many fish are still going to be alive in 30 years? You know, it's hard to say. And if the oceans die, we die. I mean, it's just the canary in the coal mine, right?
Yeah, I
So,
don't have a lot of optimism because I see that policymakers in the West were so particularly short-sighted, and I blame the West because we industrialized first, and it was kind of in our hands to move the energy transition, but we didn't transition. We further refined our technologies, and then we kind of said, "Oh, in the future we'll have all the right technologies will be right there in time for us." But then we forgot about the rest of the world. And another part of the world that we've forgotten about in this development scheme is Africa. You know, Another 1.4 billion plus people live in Africa, and Africa throughout the 21st century will be rapidly industrializing. And, I don't believe they'll be using oil, gas, and coal solely. But what you'll find is they'll do what China and India are. China and India are actually the largest builder out of solar and wind. That's going to happen in India, in China, and excuse me, in Africa too. But like I said, what you're going to see is that carbon intensity will go down while carbon consumption or emissions will still be going up. So we're going to be in a huge predicament. And as the rest of the world that we forgot in the 20th century, as they finally develop, they're going to be using much, much more fossil fuels than we have, even at our peak. And they'll be using much more fossil fuels, even with huge mixes of renewables.
yeah, it's true. It's true. Hey, I want to give a big shout out to our resident oceanographer, Jim Massa. I saw that he was recently published in the Arctic News, which is kind of
Congratulations.
exciting.
And we did a show last night. So anybody that hasn't
Uh-huh.
caught it, we've been doing these marathon long shows lately, but they're interesting. So if you haven't caught it, Jim is on ours from last night as well.
Yep. Yeah, and Sandy, I imagine you'll be putting the link for the Arctic News article in the
Yep.
show notes. This is the most recent article, just came out, Accelerating Loss of Global Snow and Ice Cover. And Jim gives a very good
Let me see if I
ocean
can
heat
find it.
content update, which he recorded on January 22nd. So that was in the Arctic News article that you brought up before, Sandy.
Yep, and I'm going to bring it up again and let's see if we can
And
find it.
this is a good article to read in general. You know, those of you climate change nerds
What
out
is
there,
it?
it's full of maps and pictures and all sorts of things that will explain exactly how things work. It's very interesting.
This is nice. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So say everybody, please check it out and
There
his
it is.
video, this wonderful video, ocean heat content was very popular. I'm really proud of you, Jim. Of course. Why wouldn't I be?
We're all proud of Jim.
Yeah, we're all So he gets.
We love our team.
Yes, we do. We love our team. All right. So where are you guys up to? What would you like to go next?
Well, we're
Do we
about
have
an hour and
I
11
can
minutes. Sorry.
I
Didn't
can
mean
say
to-
something. Yeah.
Well, of course you can.
So I wanted to Sandy, do you have the link to my GoFundMe? Otherwise, I can post it in YouTube.
Oh, did I have it?
I can plug it
know.
because I'm on
Well, just
YouTube
tell
right now.
everybody and
Yeah, so I'll tell
look
everybody what's
for
going on.
it.
So
Yeah.
so
I don't know if I have
I
it.
set up a GoFundMe to help me get some money to help me pay for my tuition for next school year. The emergency management graduate program is not admitting any more students effective this semester. It is over. The program will be ending with me and the last two other PhD students that were admitted last semester. And the unfortunate reason for that is that the school has gotten reduced funding from the state of North Dakota, and North Dakota State decided in its grand wisdom that the emergency management graduate program should get axed as a result. So there won't be any more students being admitted to the program or for masters or PhDs. The undergraduate program will remain, but the masters and PhDs program will not. There are no more assistantships, so I was hoping to be a teaching assistant for an undergraduate class next year, but that's not going to happen. I would have paid my tuition. And basically, there will be no more graduate students in the program probably by 2025. I will probably graduate and defend my dissertation sometime in 2024, and as will the other two students that entered with me last semester. So, as a result, I'm having to either take out student loans to pay for it, and then on Monday I'm going to spend all day filling out scholarship applications and writing essays for scholarship applications. So that will be fun.
I've got
and then
it. I'm going to pull
yeah,
it up
and
to
then
show everybody. All right.
and then obviously, if I absolutely have to, I can try to get a job on campus that would spend 20 hours a week doing something having nothing to do with my PhD in order to get a graduate assistantship and get my tuition paid. So those are my options, and so I'm trying to reduce the burden of potential loans or time working so I can focus on my PhD work, which is extensive. I mean, I'm looking at working on a a manuscript for peer review for a study I did last semester with a couple other graduate students and my advisor. Sometime working on that this semester. Over the summer, I'm waiting on word on whether I'll be doing a research internship with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration for 10 weeks during the summer. I'll be writing like 6 papers on literature review on various aspects of theory and methods for emergency management related stuff over the summer as well. And then next fall or spring, I might be writing as a standalone author, a peer review paper on treatment of race in emergency management, disaster literature, review of that and pitfalls of how it's been treated and measured, and the implications of that. And yeah, I mean, I got a lot going on, so I would like to be able to have the ability to focus on an ability to do that, which means being able to go to school and do my classes and everything else. But I need money to do that, and I need quite a bit of it.
I put the link up and we can share it, and I have shared it, and let's hope that we can help Nick, because his desire is going to be everybody's benefit. His PhD will be in the kind of program where he will be someone to make a difference in our predicament going forward. So I believe in Nicholas. I completely believe in him. And so if anybody can see to it and share it all over, let's try to help him so that he can be the next director of FEMA. Although I don't know if he wants to be administrative like that. But seriously, folks, and that's why we're doing that. So the link will be in there. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you.
Yeah,
so
And
thank
much.
you.
I find it to be such a cruel irony, Nick, that right when climate change is really crunching in and really starting to get severe, that's when they find it's a good time to cancel that program,
What the
right?
heck?
And,
What the hell is
it's
that?
amazing,
That's
isn't it?
what
Because
needs the
I mean,
toilet flush.
yeah,
Sorry.
the toilet flush. Yes, I mean
Well,
that's
I
the
can
amazing
certainly
thing. I mean,
accommodate, you know.
I mean, the
Sorry.
NDSU, the NDSU emergency management program is probably by far the best one in the United States if you want actual like good scholarly work,
Wow.
at theoretical basis for why, well, for what preparedness is, what response and recovery should look like in mitigation, and trying to communicate that to the emergency management practice. And it was the first school in the United States to have a doctorate in emergency management. I mean, my I told you this before the show started. My advisor, Dr. Jessica Jensen, she's only 5 years older than me. I'm 37. She is 42 years old, and at 42, she's gotten her master's and PhD from NDSU in emergency management. She's wrote very good scholarly footprint, and she has a good academic family tree. Like, she has people that are that have written books on climate change and emergency management issues. You can look up one book called Disasterology by a graduate of NDSU, Samantha Montano. And then there's somebody else I know that works for the UN in her humanitarian aid.
Good stuff.
And she was an international student, I believe, from Kazakhstan. And she in one of my class last semester, she came on Zoom at like 2 or 3 in the morning and talked to our class about her work and her experience at NDSU, and then taking what she learned and figuring out how to do humanitarian aid better in the United Nations. I mean, it's an amazing program, but because it's small, because it's more specialized and interdisciplinary, and because it doesn't have tons of scholars, coming out of it, you know, even though the scholarly work that is coming out in the practical work, the practice related work coming out of the program at an advanced level is very good, but very relatively smaller. They just decide, oh, we're going to dump the graduate program. I mean, my advisor calls me calls me a practidemic instead of an academic. I'm not planning on going to be a professor somewhere. I'm gaining very
Right.
advanced knowledge in emergency management as a field, and then going out and doing
Yes.
research, and then going out into the meteorology realm to be basically an ambassador for emergency management and disaster science issues, having a clear understanding of meteorology as well, having a master's degree in it, so I can actually, cross fields into that discipline, work for NOAA, work for the Weather Service, and be able to inform about
The
how to
end.
better deal with, these issues. So,
Horrible
I mean,
end.
that's, that that's what this program was amazing about this program, and they're killing it because of because maybe I should
Unreal.
speak too much.
All right.
There are other
Shh.
certain
Shh.
programs
Shh.
that may
Shh. Shh.
not
Shh.
want this one to exist because they want the money more than they want emergency management to have it. So,
That's
so
what
there's a
it
little
always
It
comes
is.
competition,
down to.
a
It
little
is.
academic competition for funding. And I mean, you can't help but be competitive because the state and ultimately our federal government does not support education at any level enough,
Right.
and that's very sad.
Well, yeah, but that's we'll have to do another show on that topic, or we'll save that topic for Antonio's new channel. And Antonio will be doing that. He told us last time he will be doing a new channel on his own, which will deal with more political things, which is great. So, of course, that's probably going to be a conversation gone over there.
Absolutely. Sure. I mean, to talk about the rot in our institutions right before the inevitable collapse of our biosphere.
Oh, as the biosphere dissolves, right, Jennifer? Oh,
Oh,
jeez.
absolutely. It's
Oh,
happening before
my
our very
God.
eyes,
I
faster
was
than
going to ask
expected.
Sandy, do we have any time to take maybe a couple questions from the audience before we get out of here?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have one. Gary Rucker asked, what are your thoughts about La Nina collapse by spring of this year?
I'll throw that one to Nick or Jennifer.
We're doing
Oh,
all
you mean La
three.
Nina? Is that
Man.
what he was asking?
Yeah, what are your
I know.
thoughts about La Nina collapse by spring?
Well, I mean, I know. From what I've heard, La Nina is just supposed to persist through spring, and then it's likely to return back to normal conditions. I mean, it's kind of funny, normal, but it never really stays normal very long because it oscillates between La Nina and El Nino fairly frequently, but it would go back to more normal conditions, which could mean, hopefully, later in the fall, you would get a little more rainfall, more normal rainfall patterns for parts of the country that are not doing very well with rainfall right now. But yes, the La Nina should persist through at least the first half of this year and then fade away. And obviously it's way too far in the future to know anything about El Nino reemerging in but I suspect we won't see El Nino reemerge this year. It's not impossible, but at the very least, we'll have return to neutral conditions by the middle of this year.
All right. There's really not that many questions out there. There's comments. Let's see. Fieldby said African continent saw significant increase in coups in the last year and a half, with U.S. trained military figures carrying out takeovers in Burkina Faso, Sudan, Guinea, Chad, and Mali. Mali, nothing to see. So there's disasters right there in war, in
Yeah.
warring. Anybody have a something they want to say to Fieldby on this one?
Well, the U.S. can't keep their hands out of it. We just love to cause coups all over the world. And
They call them
probably
coups.
at another time, we could talk about how basically the U.S. started the Vietnam War. I mean, I've got some information about that. It's too much to go into right now, but
Now,
it's very typical of the U.S. to cause coups, and they just get their fingers all over everything, and they just end up making things worse all the
yeah,
time.
yeah,
It
free
happens
range
all the
organic
time.
war. Thanks,
Yeah.
human. There, yeah, and CB's like, there's more than that. Oh, we know. That's a whole different kind of thing. We can't even touch scratch the iceberg, the tip of the
Mm.
iceberg, the tip of the iceberg. Speaking of, I have a picture of icebergs. All right, so everybody, we are an hour and 24 minutes. Hour and 24 minutes. Hi, Mike. Oh, Mike Loglio, you're here from the boroughs of New York. And Jim, thank you for coming. And Dick's got a good one. Good God, war. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. I'd like to have. Oh, There's a guest I'm thinking of trying to get on. I'm not going to tell, but it's a female, and she is a big anti-war activist. So, all
Well, I
right,
was just
guys.
saying, with
Yes.
that last note, did you guys see the new article on forgetting where it came out in where the U.S. Army is declaring war on climate change?
Oh, they are
They
they?
are?
Really? Let me
What's
see if
up
I
with
can
that?
let me see if I can pull it up. The US Army is saying they're declaring war on
Yeah,
climate
it's
change?
it's
No
just
shit.
about greenerizing the military. We're going to have
Oh, okay.
biodiesel bombs and electric Humvees.
War
They're
on
greenwashing. They're greenwashing.
Right.
Yeah.
Isn't
Well,
that nice?
I'm looking for it. Let's
Well, I feel
see.
very relieved, Antonio.
Yeah. The
Makes me
next
feel
time
safer.
the next time that a group of kids on a school bus gets drone strike, it'll be a electric drone instead of a gas powered one.
All right, wait a second. I'm pulling up something I have here. Let's see. And we'll show it. We'll show this article. It's
We're,
slow. It's a slow go, but
we're going to
let's
get
see
our
if we
carbon intensity down.
okay.
War.
Oh my, it doesn't want to pull up. It's going slow. It says Biden. Oh, you know why? Because it's giving me a limited time bullshit thing that I want to get rid of. So I can't pull the one up. Hang on, guys. We'll find this other one. An actual okay, here. The wow, is this shit slow? Come on.
Maybe it's just military, U.S. military, not the army specifically.
Well, here I've got one right here. Let's see. The regulatory review, an actual war on climate change, and yeah. Well, this one is talking about what the answer is yes, and using what National Security Authority in addressing climate change threats is kind of they're going to call this the climate security century. Okay. Let's see. Well, that's good. That's a good one. That's a whole other show too, right? So, what did you say it was? The U.S. Army specifically?
You know what I saw it on? It was a little commercial, not a commercial, it was a little thing on here, I'll send it to you. It's on CNBC with
Really?
Shepard Smith. I'm about to send it
All
to
right,
you.
send it to me, and I'll let me see if I can put it up. Everybody's probably more than happy to wait 2 seconds while we can look and see, how we are literally
I don't know if we
destroying.
have it. I just sent it to you in
I
the
got it.
Facebook.
I got it. I got it. I'm gonna pull it up. Why not? Everything's just going super slow, but let's see here. Okay.
It's Shep
My
Smith.
God, you think I'm in a 286 old PC? This thing's just, I know, it's not pulling up. Oh, okay, here we go. Here we go. Hang on. Let's get this pulled up and we can see just what the heck. All right. U.S. Army says time to address climate change is now. Is this it? This is the one, huh? All right. So everybody, you can see this. We'll put the show notes here. The U.S. Army's roadmap to get to zero emissions by 2050. Okay, guys, we're going to do a show on this. We'll have to come back. We'll reconvene. We'll look for all the crap about this because by 2050, Do you think, I mean, our fossil fuel intensive military? I don't know.
Well,
2050. They're giving
they're
themselves
the
time.
biggest emitters of carbon dioxide and climate change
Yeah,
gases,
they
the
are.
US military. Just like that. It's more than you've emitted your entire life, just like that. Boom. I mean, huge. Huge.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's an interesting way to end, Antonio. I'm glad that you brought that one up, and I'll put those in the show notes for anyone that cares. All right, well, guys, listen, this has been a good show. And you guys, all three of you, want to give your little parting goodbyes? Yes. The state of the planet is what? How about that? End with, okay, the state of the planet is.
WASF, Sandy.
Yeah. Yeah, let's get the silent vortex music.
Oh my God. I mean,
Okay.
the more I study it, the more hopeless I become about it. I hope there's a way out of this, but I tend to think it isn't, you know.
We
It's
are, like
weird.
Vegematic says, happily hopeless,
Yeah.
but we keep on
That's
going.
right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I'll
I
keep
mean, I
the audience on what's happening in Winston-Salem with the fertilizer chemical plant as that issue hopefully gets resolved, any of the implications after it, and generally report back what's happening around the world.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I do what I do not because of necessarily a solid outcome. I mean, even in emergency management world, you know, emergency managers, that actually facilitate things. They can't control policy, even if they know policies are harming and making their job more difficult. It's up to politicians to do that, and up to people to push those politicians to do that. And sometimes both aren't interested, or certain groups are interested, but they don't have the power to do so. And so the politicians don't listen, and nothing gets done. And you see that from local to national to international stages, consistently. The most vulnerable are the most ignored, and so the best you can do is try to advocate for those people that are disadvantaged and are most vulnerable to the harmful effects of climate change and disasters in general. And because dealing with those vulnerabilities will ultimately help those people and help societies um, deal with these changes that are coming a little bit better than they would have otherwise. And that's the best you can do.
Yeah. Jen, you want to wrap it up?
Well, things are just happening faster and faster, and it's shocking. And, that's why I like graphs, because pictures you can get your head around it a little bit better if you can see it kind of graphed out. Oh, this is an interesting one. That was the one you just put up, global methane. This is the amount of extra methane that's getting put into the atmosphere, parts per billion. And that
She said she
also
likes
is
graphs.
on an exponential rise. And I think that I was trying to see the
Whoops.
little legend at the bottom.
Oh, the
I think,
years. It
yeah,
goes from
2000.
1983 to 2021.
Right, and
1985,
that's so
2021.
I'm trying to see where it's really taking off. Again, 2000, right? See where it is 2000, and then it's
Yeah.
starting to go up. And next time Sandy and I are on together, we'll look at the
Tomorrow?
extinction. Is it
We
are
do?
we gonna be on tomorrow, Sandy?
Why
Yes?
not? I think
Okay.
we should do our
Let's
regular
bring up
show. Well, it's
let's
Super
bring
Bowl
up
Sunday. So
well,
it's either give people an option to watch us at 6 o'clock, and then they can watch the Super Bowl, 6 o'clock Eastern. If you want, that's our regular
I mean,
day.
I'm not gonna be watching the stupid bowl, but
No, so we might as well do our show. I missed a day this week, so there you go. We might as well do our
Okay.
show. All
Okay.
right,
But
Jed. So we'll save
tomorrow,
the graph.
Sandy, just a reminder, bring up that graph that has all the different extinction events that have happened on this planet, has all
All
of
right.
the different extinction events and how quickly they set in. And that more than anything, will really give you an idea of what a predicament we are in. So, like I always say, we're here to witness it. We're trying to stay awake, amidst all this crap that is happening all around us, and maintain a balanced mental attitude despite it all.
There you go. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. And we are out.